With a lump rising dry to his throat, Karras turned and left the bedroom, and for a time he stood in the hallway, weak and irresolute. Coffee? He craved it. But a shower even more. But when he'd left the MacNeil house and returned to his room in the residence hall, it took only one look at his bed for Karras to change his priorities. Forget the shower. Man. Sleep. Half an hour. As he reached for the telephone to ask reception to give him a wake-up call, it rang. Yes, hello, Karras answered hoarsely. Someone here to see you. Father Karras, a Mr. Kinderman. Karras briefly held his breath, and then he exhaled in resignation. Okay. Tell him I'll be out in just a minute, he said weakly. As he hung up the telephone, Karras saw a carton of non-filter Camel cigarettes on his desk. A note from Dyer was attached. A key to the Playboy Club has been found on the chapel kneeler in front of the votive lights. Is it yours? You can claim it at reception. With a fond expression, Karras set down the note, quickly dressed in fresh clothing and walked out of the room into reception, where Kinderman was standing at the telephone switchboard counter, delicately rearranging the composition of a vase full of flowers. As he turned and saw Karras, he was holding the stem of a pink camellia. Ah, Father. Father Karras. Kinderman greeted him cheerfully, his expression quickly changing to concern when he saw the exhaustion in the Jesuit's face. He replaced the camellia and came forward to meet him. You look awful, he said. What's the matter? That's what comes of all this schlepping around the track. Give it up, Father. You're going to die anyway. Listen, come. He gripped Karras by the elbow and an upper arm and propelled him toward the exit to the street. You've got a minute? He asked as they passed through the door. Just barely, Karras murmured. What is it? A little talk. I need advice, nothing more, just advice. What about? In just a minute. For now we'll just walk. We'll take air. We'll enjoy. He hooked his arm through the Jesuits and guided him diagonally to the other side of the street. Ah, now, look at that. Beautiful. Gorgeous. He was pointing to the sun sinking low on the Potomac, and in the stillness sudden laughter rang out, and then the talking all together of Georgetown undergraduates in front of a drinking hall near the corner of 36th Street. One punched another one hard on the arm, and the two began amicably wrestling. Ah, college. Breathed out Kinderman ruefully as he glanced at the lively gathering of young men. I never went, but I wish. Turning his gaze back to Karras, he frowned with concern. I mean, seriously, you really look bad, he said. What's the matter? You've been sick. When would Kinderman come to the point? Karras wondered. No, just busy, the Jesuit answered. Slow it down, then, wheezed Kinderman. Slow. You saw the Bolshoi ballet, incidentally, at the Watergate? No. No, me neither. But I wish. They're so graceful. So cute. They had come to the car barn's low stone wall, where the view of the sunset was unimpeded, and they stopped, Karras resting a forearm on top of the wall and turning his glance from the sunset to Kinderman. Okay, what's on your mind? Karras asked him. Well, Father, said Kinderman, sighing. He turned, then, hunching forward with his hands clasped on top of the wall as he moodily stared across the river and said, I'm afraid I've got a problem. Professional? Well, partly, only partly. What is it? Well, mostly it's, Kinderman hesitated, then continued. Well, mostly it's ethical, you could say, Father Karras. A question. His voice trailing off, the detective turned around and, leaning his back against the wall, he looked down at the sidewalk and frowned. There's just no one I could talk to about it. Not my captain in particular, you see. I just couldn't. I couldn't tell him. So I thought. Here, abruptly, the detective's eyes lit up. I had an aunt, you should hear this, it's funny. She was terrified, for years of my uncle. The poor woman, she never dared to say a word to him. Never, much less to ever raise her voice. So whenever she got mad at him for something, right away, she'd run quick to the closet in her bedroom, and then there in the dark, you won't believe this, in the dark, by herself, with all the clothes hanging up and the moths, she would curse, at my uncle and tell him what she thought of him for maybe 20 minutes. Really? I mean, yelling. She'd come out, she'd feel better, she'd go kiss him on the cheek. Now what is that, Father Karras? That's good therapy or not? It's very good, Karras answered with a wan, bleak smile. And I'm your closet now? Is that what you're saying? In a way, the detective answered gravely. But more serious. And the closet must speak. Got a cigarette? Kinderman stared at Karras blankly, incredulous. A condition like mine and I would smoke? No, you wouldn't, Karras murmured as he turned to face the river and clasped his hands atop the wall. It was to make them stop trembling. Some doctor. God forbid I should be sick in some jungle and instead of Albert Schweitzer, there is with me only you. You cure warts still with frogs, Dr. Karras? It's toads, Karras answered, subdued. Kinderman frowned. You're not smiling jaunty jolly today, Father Karras. Something's wrong. Now what is it? Come on, tell me. Karras lowered his head and was silent. Then, okay, he said softly. Ask the closet whatever you want. Sighing, the detective faced out to the river. I was saying, he began. He scratched his brow with a thumbnail, then continued. I was saying, well, let's say I'm working on a case, Father Karras. It's a homicide. Dennings? No, you wouldn't be familiar with it, Father. It's something purely hypothetical. Got it. Like a ritual witchcraft murder, this looks, the detective continued broodingly, picking his words very carefully and slowly. And let us say that in this house, this hypothetical house, there are living 5 people, and that one must be the killer. With his hand, he made flat, chopping motions of emphasis. Now I know this. I know this for a fact. Then he paused, slowly exhaling breath. But then the problem. All the evidence. Well, it points to a child, Father Karras. A little girl maybe 10, 12 years old, just a baby. She could maybe be my daughter. Yes, I know, sounds fantastic. Ridiculous, but true. Now there comes to this house, Father Karras, a very famous Catholic priest, and this case being purely hypothetical, Father. I learned through my also hypothetical genius that this priest has once cured a very special type illness. An illness which is mental, by the way, a fact I mentioned just in passing for your interest. Karras mournfully lowered his head and nodded. Yes, go on, he said bleakly. What else? What else? A great deal. It also seems that there is, well, Satanism involved in this illness, plus also strength. Yes, incredible strength. And this hypothetical girl, let us say, then, could so easily twist a man's head around. Head lowered, the detective was nodding now. Yes, she could. And so the question, breaking off? The detective grimaced thoughtfully, then went on. You see, the girl is not responsible, Father. She's insane, Father, totally demented and also just a child, Father Karras. A child. And yet the illness that she has, it could be dangerous. She could kill someone else. Who's to know? Once again the detective turned and squinted out across the river. It's a problem, he said quietly and morosely. What to do? Hypothetically, I mean. Just forget it? Forget it and hope she gets, Kinderman paused, gets well? He reached for a handkerchief and blew his nose. Oh, well, I just don't know. I don't know. It's a terrible decision, he said as he searched for a clean, unused section of the handkerchief. Yes, it's awful. Just awful. Horrific. And I hate to be the one who has to make it. He again blew his nose, lightly dabbed at a nostril, then stuffed the damp handkerchief back into a pocket. Father, what would be right in such a case? He asked, turning back to Karras. Hypothetically, I mean. What do you believe would be the right thing to do? For an instant, Karras throbbed with a surge of rebellion, with a dull, weary anger at the piling on of weight upon weight. He let it ebb away into calm, and firmly meeting the detective's gaze, he answered softly, I would put it in the hands of a higher authority. I believe it is there at this moment. Yes. And I would leave it there, Lieutenant. For some moments their gazes stayed locked. Then Kinderman nodded, saying, Yes, Father. Yes. Yes, I thought you would say that. He turned to again observe the sunset. So beautiful, he said. And so what makes us think such a thing has beauty while the Leaning Tower of Pisa does not? Also lizards and armadillos. Another mystery. He tugged back his sleeve for a look at his wristwatch. Ah, well, I have to go. Any minute, Mrs. K will be shrieing that the dinner is cold. He turned back to Karras. Thank you, Father. I feel better. Much better. Oh, incidentally, you could maybe do a favor. Give a message? If by chance you should ever meet a man last name Engstrom, please tell him, well, just say to him, Elvira is in a clinic. She's all right. He'll understand. Would you do that? I mean, if by some crazy chance you should meet him. Faintly puzzled, Karras answered, I will. Look, we couldn't make a film some night, Father. Karras cast his eyes down and, nodding, murmured, soon. You're like a rabbi when he mentions the Messiah. Always, soon. Listen, do me yet another favor please, would you? Glancing up, Karras saw that the detective looked gravely concerned. Stop this running round the track for a little. Just walk. Okay, Father. Slow it down. Could you do that for me, please? Karras smiled faintly and said, I will. Hands in the pockets of his coat, the detective looked down at the sidewalk in resignation. Yes, I know, he said, nodding. Soon. Always soon. As he started away, he stopped, reached up a hand to the Jesuit's shoulder and squeezed, saying, Elia Kazan, your director, sends regards. For a time, Karras watched him as he listed down the street, watched with fondness and with wonder at the heart's labyrinthine turnings and improbable redemptions. He looked up at the clouds washed in pink above the river, then beyond to the west, where they drifted at the edge of the world, glowing faintly like a promise remembered. There'd been a time when he often saw God in such sights, felt his breath in the tinting of clouds, as now the lines of a poem he'd once loved returned to haunt him. Glory be to God for dappled things. For skies of couple color as a brindled cow. For rose moles all in stipple upon trout that swim. Fresh fire coal chestnut falls, finch's wings. He fathers forth whose beauty is past change. Praise him. Karras pressed the side of a fist against his lips and looked down against the sadness and the pain of loss welling up from his throat toward the corners of his eyes as he thought of a line from a psalm that once filled him with joy. Oh, Lord, he remembered achingly, I have loved the beauty of thy house. Karras waited. Dared not risk another glance at the sunset. Instead, he looked up at Regan's window. Sharon let him in and told him nothing had changed. She was carrying a bundle of foul-smelling laundry. She excused herself. I've got to get this into the washing machine. Karras watched her. Thought of coffee. But now he heard the demon croaking viciously at Merrin. He started toward the staircase, but then stopped as he remembered the message he was supposed to give Carl. Where was he? He turned to ask Sharon and glimpsed her disappearing down the basement steps. He went looking for the houseman in the kitchen. He wasn't there. Only Chris. Her elbows propped and hands cupped at her temples, she was sitting at the breakfast table looking down at. What was it? Karras quietly moved closer. Stopped. A photo album. Scraps of paper. Pasted photos. Chris hadn't seen him. Excuse me, please, Karras said softly. Is Carl in his room? Chris looked up at him wanly and shook her head. He's on an errand, she answered huskily and softly. Karras heard her sniffle. Then, there's coffee there, Father, Chris murmured. It ought to perk in just a minute. As Karras glanced over at the percolator light, he heard Chris getting up from the table, and when he turned he saw her moving quickly past him with her face averted. He heard a quavery, excuse me, and in a moment Chris had exited the kitchen. Karras looked down at the photo album. Candid shots. A young girl. Very pretty. With a pang, Karras realized he was looking at Regan. Here, blowing out candles on a whipped creamy birthday cake. Here, sitting on a lakefront dock in shorts and a t-shirt, waving gaily at the camera. Something was stenciled on the front of the t-shirt, camp. He could not make it out. On the opposite page a ruled sheet of paper bore the script of a child. If instead of just clay, I could take all the prettiest things. Like a rainbow. Or clouds or the way a bird sings. Maybe then, dearest mommy. If I put them all together, I could really make a sculpture of you. Below the poem, I love you. Happy Mother's Day. The signature, in pencil, was Rags. Karras shut his eyes. He could not bear this chance meeting. He turned away wearily and waited for the coffee to brew. With lowered head, he gripped the counter and again closed his eyes. Shut it out. He thought, shut it all out. But he could not. And as he listened to the thumping and bubbling of the percolating coffee, his hands began trembling again as compassion swelled suddenly and blindly into rage at disease and at pain, at the suffering of children and the frailty of the body and the monstrous and outrageous corruption of death. If instead of just clay, the rage ebbed away to sorrow and helpless frustration. All the prettiest things. He could not wait for coffee. He must go. He must do something. Help someone. Try. He left the kitchen and as he came to the living room, He looked through the open door and saw Chris on the sofa, sobbing convulsively, while Sharon tried comforting her. He looked away and walked up the stairs, heard the demon roaring frenziedly at Merrin. Would have lost. You would have lost and you knew it. You scum, Merrin. Bastard. Come back. Come and. Karras blocked it out. All the way a bird sings.